why we're doing this. Yesterday made a very strong comment that the sutras is really this practice for undoing the suffering in our minds. And I think we can agree that while there's things in the outside world that can cause us, discomfort, and we can say a lot of discomfort or minimal discomfort, that ultimately the true source of suffering is within us. It's how we perceive it, it's our beliefs around it, it's it's within us. And so it's up to us then to disassemble that. And for the record, this is a lifelong practice. And, Annie, you're very young. And so, you're going to get to a certain level and then you'll be like, oh, I'm so liberated. I've got this. I'm going to talk about that actually in a second. And then you're going to get to be 35 and then, things are going to start happening to you in life. And then all your spiritual practice it's called into question, you reapply it, you go back to the mat, you redo it, you recommit, and then you're like, okay, I got this. I can live the rest of my life in pure joy and peace. And then you turn 45, and then you need a spinal fusion, a hip replacement surgery, or maybe a relationship ended. All of these things keep coming at us. And so the practice never stops. And just be very wary of that kind of thinking in your own mind, like, I got this. And so in the first chapter of the Sutras, Patanjali lays out this is what yoga is. And I'm not going to get into all of that talk because that's in the pre-recorded sections. But ultimately, yoga is the quieting of the mind so that we can see ourselves for who we really are, be rested in that knowledge of the self, like be truly rested in the knowledge of the self. And then Sutra 1.4, he says, or we identify with all of that stuff, or we identify with something as simple as you guys are meditating in the morning and then you smell these delicious pancakes being made or something. You go, I am hungry. Boom. Identification. And depending on your beliefs around being hungry, you can either be okay with that or you can be really upset about that. So we have reactions constantly. As soon as we start to identify with something, there's a reaction to it. And there he says is the source of suffering. And as he moves on in the sutras, he gives us, a few indicators and tools on how to overcome it. But it's really not until chapter 2 that he says, okay, let's get to work. And this is what you need to do. I want to kind of highlight something in the sutras. And it's one of my favorite sutras because it's just a very clear, bold, very profound statement. It's Sutra 216, and it says, all future pain can be avoided. Like, and it's very clear, by the way, because he's not saying all your past pain is, not there, it doesn't exist. He says all future pain can be avoided. It's a very bold statement. Sutra 216. In PRT's book, it's very similar. It's the translation is a little similar. He says, pain that has not yet come can be abandoned. Oh, Jesus, I got work to do. If David was here, he said, I would live a life free of pain if nobody else was on the planet. Right now we're doing the residential program, and actually it's been going really great. I mean, everybody that's come is on the same page, and this has been pretty much this beautiful immersion community. But quite frankly, they're not here long enough for stuff to happen. Usually, for shit to start hitting the fan, it takes 2 months. Usually the section between 2 and 3 months is when sometimes things start to surface. But the longer you're in community, you go to a yoga community and you think like, oh, it's going to be wonderful and everybody's going to meditate and we're going to chant Om Namah Shivaya all day long and pray and oh, and then 2 months the masks start to come off and and people start to see their reflections. And so we really get to see ourselves. Well, and then you guys think like, politics only exists in Washington or wherever. I mean, you want to talk about politics in an ashram. Woo, child. And and why is that? Why is that? Well, the answer is right in the beginning of Sutra 2, chapter 2, sorry. That, let me back up though before I go down that path. That in Sutra 2:1, Patanjali starts off with the very first practice or a description of a practice into yoga. And the practice is tapas svajaya ishvara pranidhana. And tapas, we've talked a lot about. Tapas is this really kind of going out of our way to create heat in our lives so that we can burn away those things that are no longer serving us. So, Dee, you've been talking a lot about giving up wine or alcohol, sorry, and smoking. And that's a tapas. It's changing this kind of deep rooted habit pattern. My business partner, one of his tapas for a while, and pretty much even still, is anger. You recognize that he kind of first response or first responder is anger. And he woke up one day and said, I don't want to live my life like this. I don't want to be like this. And so, but it's hard. But in the light of tapas, that's where the seat of consciousness is. And anytime we start to do things differently, there's a little bit of shaking things up. So when you guys go home, one of the questions that I have for you is, what tapas are you going to create in your own life? And one of my favorite words, by the way, for tapas, or the synonyms. Yes, I've always struggled with that word since I was a young child. Synonyms is experiment. That, you talk to some yoga people that are kind of in the know a little bit, and they'll start talking about tapas as being this really painful thing. Oh, I'm going through tapas right now, or I'm practicing tapas. And I actually will very blatantly say that tapas is painful to ignorant people. that that really tapas is experimentation. Dee right now is experimenting with what's it like to not smoke, what's it like to not drink. And she's conducting that experiment and seeing the results of it. And what are some of the results, Dee? I feel good. Do 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 do. Yes. Yeah, yeah. I think it's really important for us to look at our lives and see where can we create space for experimentation. I want to give you a couple of examples of that. One is in my own life. I've done a lot of experiments, but one of them was vegetarianism. And so there's been like 3 times in my life where I became a vegetarian for a certain amount of time. The first time was the reason was because I was questioning the whole meat thing and I was confused about it. So I just decided just to stop eating meat. And then the second two times was because I was doing a practice. And it was quite remarkable what happened as I did it. The second example I have is a friend of mine. His name is Andrew, and Andrew lives in New York. And I saw him. This actually goes back now 5 years ago. It feels like just yesterday. And we were in. He came to me within. He came with me to India. And one of my favorite things to do is to take people to India, up to the Himalayan mountains. And um, he, we were talking, and he was telling me about how he bought his new apartment, and I was like, "What? You had this really great apartment in Chelsea?" And he goes, "Yeah, but I wanted a change." And so he got his new place, and he was really excited about it. And then I said, "You must be really happy." And he said, "Well, I'm not really that happy. I don't know. I feel like something's missing." Um, and so I said to him, or as we were talking, I found out how much he likes TV. And I kind of knew this, but he reminded me of it. And I said, "Yeah, you like TV a lot." And he says, "Yeah, if I just turn the TV on, I can just sit there all day on my weekends and watch it. And then I never go out or do anything else. Like, but I'm so happy just turning that on and watching it. Like it just makes me so content." And I said to him, Andrew, have you ever considered like maybe going without TV for 30 days and seeing what happens? Yeah, I think if he had a gun, I would have been dead in that moment. Because then I followed that up and I said, I mean, what if you maybe gave your TV? Because if you have it in your apartment, you might watch it. So what if you gave your TV to somebody for 30 days? And I didn't even get the rest of my sentence out. I mean, that would have been a great tapas. And already you can see just the idea of it was a tapas, that he really wasn't ready to go into it. It's kind of funny, but all of us have these kind of like little things that we, hold on to. So that's kind of experimentation. And, there's all kinds of ways to experiment if you drive to work every day, maybe taking a different route to work. Or if you wake up every day at 5 o'clock, maybe wake up at 4:45. Experiment. Well, yeah, and there's all kinds of tapas, and part of it is, we talk about indomitable will, which is directly related to clear intention. If your intention isn't clear, the indomitable willpower is very minimal. If you want strong intention, or sorry, strong willpower, then you have to have clear intention. So that's a little bit about tapas. And then the second one is svajaya. And svajaya is multi layered, but it kind of means roughly this sense of self study. And this has, again, a few layers to it. In its truest sense of the word, it really means self study, like meditation, contemplation on the self, contemplation on who we really are. But at a more grosser level, it also means starting to unpack ourselves. And one of the kind of best contemplations to start that process is, who am I? Asking the question, who am I? There was a great saint around the 1950s, 1940s, 1950s, named Ramana Krishna, who made his ashram in Arunachala in India. And that was his gift. at the age of like 17, 16, 17. He laid in his bed one day, went inward and said, what would it be like to die? Who am I if I'm dead? And he had spontaneous samadhi from that experience. He went into deep, deep, deep samadhi, and that questioning led him to understanding fully who he was. Um, so that he then started his organization, his foundation. Well, actually, his followers really did, and they that was the question: who am I? So Svajaya, and then Ishvara Pranidhana. We actually see that word several times in the Yoga Sutras, Ishvara Pranidhana. Each time we see that word, it denotes or it connotates a different significance. But Ishvara means the Lord. And then Pranidhana means to surrender. So to surrender everything to the Lord or to the universe. To not be attached to anything. But also that if you go out and do something, that is also turned over to the Lord. That the fruits of your labor you're not attached to. That you're ultimately not attached to those things that you produce in your life. It also denotes this quality of faith, of cultivating faith in a higher power. And this quality of faith, I hope you guys get to go through some of the sutras before the end of next week, because we're going to talk a lot about faith next week. But there's this this very strong push in the Yoga Sutras to begin to cultivate faith. And so we see that in this teaching of Ishvara Pranidhana. So that's Sutra 2.1 in a nutshell. And then in Sutra 2.2, he then goes on to say, by practicing this kind of yoga, Kriya Yoga he calls it, where tapas, vajaya, Ishvara Pranidhana, that we can overcome the causes of suffering, that we can reduce suffering in our life, which he calls the kleshas. Kleshas means basically suffering. And so what are those causes of suffering? So there's kind of 4, but they all are connected to the one. And the one is sort of like if you imagine a tree, the tree trunk. The tree trunk is avidya. And avidya has 4 branches. And sometimes the tree is also depicted by the trunk, which is avidya, and then it's supported by the root system. And so we'll talk about each of them. So avidya really means ignorance. It means not knowing. You'll remember in the first day, one of the things that I mentioned is teach from a place of direct knowledge. This kind of idea of direct knowledge in our tradition is really important. You hear about things, you hear about practices, you hear about samadhi, you know that you should try to achieve samadhi. But until you have direct experience of what that's like, it's not really real for you. Until you can have direct experience of the self, it's not really real for you. And so the only way to reduce avidya is through direct knowledge. And avidya is very tricky. I just made a comment a moment ago about how Annie in her younger years is doing yoga right now. And there's going to be a point, maybe, if she keeps up with this practice, where she'll feel like, yeah, I got it. And we all are like that in our lives, because I remember when I was a teenager, I really thought I knew everything. I actually did. I really believed at the age of 15, I got this. And my dad put on the refrigerator this little kind of sign. It said, teenagers, move out now while you still know everything. And of course, your parents, you can see this with your children, but I'm sure we all remember that feeling of being in our teenage years and thinking, like, oh, yeah, our parents are so stupid. They don't know anything. I should just leave home now. And some of us had fantasies of even running away from home and starting these fabulous lives. And and I look back, I remember when I was in my 20s, I looked back in utter horror at my 17, 16-year-old self going, "Oh Lord." But now that I'm 27, I got this. I've kind of figured out life. I know where I'm going. And then I look back when I was 35 and I was like, who was that guy? And I don't think it was until I was around 46 that I started to realize I don't know anything. I probably will never know anything. And so just live the best life that I can and start listening more. Actually, I'm almost 50. Come on. So this is actually going to lead into the second klesha in just a second, which has happened there. But that is avidya. And each time you think you know something, you realize you'll find out if you keep up with this kind of practice of yoga that you really don't know anything. And this universe just keeps expanding for you. Tantra, by the way, in a nutshell, is this practice of expanding our idea of ourselves, of who we think we are, of the world we live in, of opening up to possibilities. If you asked me like 5 years ago, oh, Aaron, how do you feel about doing a 14-day yoga teacher training? I would say, fuck off. That's crazy. You can't do it in 14 days. And then all of a sudden, one day, I was kind of like, we could do this. What happened? Did anything happen on the outside world? Did anything change out there? No. It's me that had to change. Something inside of me had to change. And we constantly need to challenge ourselves to expand, the possibilities of who we can be in our life and what we can do. What holds us back is our own limitations. And the word for those limitations, one of the words is avidya. We just don't know what we're capable of doing. And because we don't know, we just stop that process. We just, nope, not possible. You guys know what I'm talking about. I remember, well, I wasn't actually alive at this point, but I've heard the stories, the idea of going to space was impossible. And all of a sudden, a president says, we are going to the moon. And all of a sudden, this huge paradigm shifted. And the impossible all of a sudden became, let's do this. Which, by the way, is a great example of leadership, is opening up the doors of possibility for you and your community. If it's that your family is your community, or you're, asking your community of people that you're with, what is the impossible that we can step into and accomplish? So Tantra is this idea of constantly expanding and then weaving that expansion into our fabric of who we are, and then expanding again. Expanding again and again and again. Some of us are forced to expand, by the way. Sometimes we have to expand out of necessity. I would encourage you to not wait for that to happen, but to expand, on your own terms. It's a lot kinder. It's less painful. So avidya has some reinforcements. There's reinforcements that contribute to this sense of avidya. One of them I just demonstrated between me and Annie just now when she said, "You don't look 45, really?" Oh, thank you. That's the first one is a shmita. A shmita, A-S, and then M-I-T-A, a shmita. A shmita is basically translates as I maker. That that feeling of I-ness that we have at our core. This ego that I am attached to. So we go into our life and we really constantly, unconsciously, are reinforcing our sense of I-ness. I am a good person. I am a yogi. That, by the way, is one of the worst sources of suffering. Do you know how many times people have said to me that didn't agree with me, Aaron, you're such a bad yogi? Like, that's going to hurt me. No, really, they use that as a sword. Like, you're a bad yogi, or you're a bad Christian, or you're a bad mother. I mean, that's like, this I-ness around what a good mother or a good parent should be. I can tell you, a few years ago, I was looking into adoption and I was really doing a lot of vichara around it. And it's a long story, but one of the things that surfaced for me and reasons why I wasn't wanting to adopt or that was a barrier for me is what are people going to think if they don't agree with my parenting techniques? And that was like a really like scary thing for me. I don't know how parents do it, because people are constantly judging them and judging their ego around their parenting techniques. And to the point now where you can actually have your kids taken away from you if somebody sees something that they don't agree with. So, so their ego of who we think we are, and then we project that ego. And a lot of us, really, some of us, not all of us, but some of us try and wear these like nice little doilies. I'm a good person. I'm a kind person. and and so there all of these things are distracting us, A, from doing the real work on ourselves, and B, reinforcing our ignorance because we actually create these egos to such a degree that we believe that we are that person. And the question is then the work for you is who am I? Again, who am I if I'm not that person? Who am I if I'm not this lawyer? Who am I if I'm not this 22-year-old trying to become a professional because my parents want me to become that professional? How many children or children, young people are in school today doing things that they don't really want to be doing and creating massive debt because they're trying to fulfill an ego that their parents want them to live. So this kind of source of suffering this is the real pandemic, I think sometimes, is that we're trying to live a life that others want us to live. But then the worst thing is that we actually start to believe that we are that person and we forget our true nature. Our job as yogis is to keep coming back to who are we at the source? Who are we if I strip away Blue Osa? The hardest thing for me in the pandemic that happened when COVID started was all of a sudden I just saw how strong my sense of self was connected to this place. And then all of a sudden it was like, who am I without it? That's why I said practice tapas before something happens. Get to work on these things. It was devastating. I had a breakdown because all of a sudden it was like, who am I? So that's a little bit of a vidya. I'm sorry, that's a little bit of a shmita, the sense of I-ness. Um, and I would say that it's that sense of I-ness that leads you away ultimately from your wholeness. That leads you away from knowing who you really are. It's that sense of identity that contributes ultimately to your suffering. So the next two, I'm going to kind of talk about them sort of together. And these two are raga. The first one is raga, R-A-G-A, raga. The second one is devesha. And the spelling of devesha is D-V-E-S-H-A, devesha. Now, at a most kind of simplistic term or idea of understanding, I think sometimes understanding pain and pleasure is understanding raga and devesha. So raga and devesha simply means likes and dislikes. So raga means likes, those things that you're attracted to, and devesha means dislikes, those things that you kind of push away. And it's kind of fair to say, this is why I said like this pain and pleasure thing, you're making decisions all day long based upon pain and pleasure, and it's usually most of the time unconscious. Why is it unconscious? Because you're making those decisions based upon who you think you are, your ego, ashmita. Your raga and devesha support your ego ultimately. My business partner, I said, famously said, you know, my comfort is non-negotiable. That's who he thinks he is. I am this kind of person that needs these things in my life in order for me to be comfortable. I need all of these things. That's ego. That's rag. I'm sorry. That's Ashmita 101. Like in order for like this is who I need to be. This is who I need to project in the world in order for me to be happy. People need to see me driving this kind of car. People need to see me eating this kind of food, this vegan food that's prepared, you know, with kale, sun-dried kale. You know, we see this epidemic a lot in certain communities. This strong identification with what we think we need. That's raga. I'm going to go out and get all these things to support who I am. So we go after those things in life. That's raga. And it reinforces, again, it reinforces the sense of ego. I'm sorry, the sense of ignorance. It reinforces this downward spiral of avidya. Everybody just say that because avidya is so heavy. Just go, avidya. It's really heavy. You know, avidya, one of the synonyms of avidya is tamas. Om tamasoma joytir gamaya. Lead me from avidya. Lead me from that heaviness of not knowing to this lightness of joytir, this lightness of truth, of knowledge. Let me see those things that I'm chasing that ultimately are leading me away from my wholeness in life. And I'm just going to read a little bit from this book. This is PRT's book, Patanjali Rajmani Tiganai. This is the second pada, the practice of the Yoga Sutras. At our core, we are pure consciousness. We are self-luminous beings. As discussed in the previous sutra, under the influence of avidya, we identify ourselves with the mind, the conduit, consciousness, uses to experience the objective world. As our identification with mind matures, we no longer see a distinction between mind, and consciousness. We no longer see who the seer, who is the seer, and who is the instrument of seeing. Our attention shifts instead to surveying our mental world and the sensory objects associated with it. This leads to the formation of Ashmita, a sense of self-identity grounded in confusion and fed by ignorance, by avidya. Ashmita is constantly fed by avidya shakti, the power of ignorance. Ashmitas are powerful and stubborn, distorted self-identity. Its refusal to examine itself and to consider the possibility of a higher and less restricted identity is unbending. Ashmita takes pride in denying that it has any problems and tirelessly defends itself from everyone and everything, including the Lord, Ishvara. It is allergic to change. Yet there is hope provided we exercise our human privilege, the capacity to change the dynamics of our Shmita and expand the scope of consciousness. Craving pleasant memories and the objects associated with them is raga, attachment. Craving unpleasant memories and the associated objects with them is devesha. Both of these forces, raga and devesha, motivate us to acquire pleasurable objects and claim them forever. We believe providence is on our side. You know, one of the reasons why I don't have stuff in my life, number one, because I want to walk through life more free. I think one of the trepidations sometimes in the back of my mind is like, what am I going to do with Blue Osa? Like, what do I do with this thing? My business partner and I have had endless conversations about that because we feel responsibility now to do something about it. But one of the other reasons why outside of Blue Osa that I don't carry anything, I really don't. If you walk into my place, it's very simple. And it's because I just don't want to be thinking on my deathbed, what do I do with this stuff? And feeling that attachment to those things. I don't want to be walking on my deathbed at the end worried about what do I do with this stuff? You know, what do I do with these things? Oh my God, I have these things. You know, they're mine. That kind of weighs us down and keeps us at a very deep level attached to this life, even though we've left. And so then we were reborn, you know, with this deep attachment to those things instead of born free, reborn free. We believe providence is on our side when we acquire enjoyable objects. We feel fuller, richer, and blessed. When we lack those objects, we feel providence is against us and experience ourselves as empty, poor, and cursed. So many of the spiritual practices really kind of embody this idea of good karma as, oh, good karma is when I have all of those good things happen to me. You know, I have a big house, I have good karma. You know, so there's this attachment, and we've kind of spun this thing out of control where if good things happen to me, you know, that's because I'm a good person and therefore I need to hold on to those things. When pleasurable experiences recede after running their course, we try to recapture and re-experience them. We have good memories of something. We have a good moment. We have a pleasurable experience. And then we try to recreate that experience all the time, instead of allowing the space for a new experience to come. That's a Shmita. The other one is Devesha. And Devesha is kind of interesting. I kind of said earlier, it means dislikes, those things that you dislike that you kind of go out of your way to avoid. And it also has a deeper meaning than that. Remember that again, we avoid things in life because we find it painful, but we also avoid those things in life because of our identity. We avoid things because those things that don't support our sense of self, you know. Um, so this is a little bit about devesha. Pleasant and unpleasant memories go hand in hand when we constantly revisit them. We justify clinging to pleasant memories, but fail to recognize our habits of clinging to unpleasant ones. After all, why hold on to unpleasant, undesirable experiences and the pain and sorrow they cause? Yet, under the influence of a mysterious force, we appear to treasure unpleasant memories even more than we treasure pleasant ones, although we may not fully realize it. This mysterious force is devesha. So, what they're saying is that we are, there's a part of our mind that is fixated on holding on to those unpleasant memories, on holding on to those unpleasant things. I'm not going to get into the details, but my mother had a really horrific, quite frankly, experience when she was young, twice. And still at 73, her whole life, she actually said to me just the other day in a voice message, like, I'm seeing this person right now, and they're finally helping me to overcome this thing that happened to me. If I could have a quarter every time my mother said that to me, I would be a millionaire. And yeah, bless her heart. Um, and there's in all of us this clinginess to, that thing that happened to me, this unpleasant thing, and it defines me. And the question then becomes again, who am I if I don't have this? Who am I if I didn't have this thing, happen to me? Devesha is loosely translated as aversion, which connotates a sense of dislike towards an object, an experience, or a feeling. It's a reaction to something, a person, an object, or an event we hate. But in Sanskrit, devesha carries more weight. It is a force accompanied by the desire to eliminate the object of our hatred. It is accompanied by a force. It is a force accompanied by the desire to eliminate the object of our hatred. Devesha is a condition of mind that has no tolerance for an enemy. It is accompanied by the desire for vengeance and contains a strong element of violence. Devesha captures and occupies our consciousness so powerfully that we cannot pull the mind away. The truth is that what we do not want to let go of is devesha itself. There's a strong tendency to protect and preserve the samskara of devesha. In its presence, we are compelled to find an object on which we can focus this afflicting force. So, yesterday, I kind of told you a little comically about that TripAdvisor review that we got from this person that was here 3.5 years ago. And do you think that that review was about me or Blue Osa? No. That was devesha happening in real time. She has a sense of herself and who she is in the world, or they have a sense of themselves and who they are. and then projected that. That's devesha. And unless we get to the root of what is triggering that desire in us to kind of lash out, it just carries with us all the time. Conquering an enemy is in the external world is as glorious as empowering sorry, let me rephrase that. Re-say that. Conquering an enemy in the external world is as glorious and empowering as forming an alliance with a group of loyal friends. Ashmita loves glory and power, and devesha is there to feed it. Devesha, hatred armed with anger, vengeance, and violence, is deeply debilitating. I'm going to read that again because this is a very powerful statement. Devesha, which is hatred armed with anger, vengeance, and violence, is deeply debilitating. It drains the brilliance of our mind and sucks the vitality from our body. We go on harboring this debilitating condition as long as our body and mind cooperate. We attribute the pain caused by devesha to external sources. We deny that we are possessed by hatred and instead claim only to hate a particular person or circumstance. We insist there is a good reason for this. In short, we rationalize our hatred, anger, vengeance, and violence. It's this person that's causing it. It's this memory that's causing me to be angry. Devesha causes us to become irrational. It shakes our nervous system, disrupts the function of our body, and eventually makes us ill, physically, mentally, and spiritually. This work is not easy. I just want to put that out there, that doing this work is not easy. If you're really committed to this path, it's not an easy path to follow. It really, asks us to hold that cherished belief of accountability. Right away is that statement of accountability that we ask you to take is this practice of understanding, why this thing is surfacing. And I often think about my own grandmother in this story, especially in relationship to this last sentence, which devesha causes us to become irrational. It shakes our nervous system, disrupts the function of the body, and eventually makes us ill, physically, mentally, and spiritually. My grandmother was a wartime person, and actually all my grandparents were wartime people. I think that one of the greatest tragedies that I didn't really have this realization until I was writing my book and working with a writer. She was talking to me, and we were talking about my grandparents and sort of their history to understand myself and painting this picture of me, in the book. And one of the subjects that came up was the amount of PTSD that our parents, and especially our grandparents, went through. More probably in my age, so probably maybe Annie, your great grandparents, that went through and never really recovered from. My grandmother, my Nan, my dad's mother, I remember when I was, I think I was about 11 at the time, and I was doing this little project for school, and I got on the phone one day and I was talking to her, and I was like, Nan, can you tell me about what it was like during the war? And she said, well, one night the siren went off, and we all went into the shelter during one of the bombings, and then we came out and our house was demolished. All four children in the house with her because my granddad was away fighting in the front lines of World War II against Nazis. And on my mother's side, both of them, my grandmother was 16 when she left home. And I don't know this for a fact, but through talking to her sister, who I just actually just recently saw about 3 years ago, who is 92 now, Auntie Daphne. Everybody needs an aunt named Auntie Daphne. Great Auntie Daphne. Everyone needs an great Auntie Daphne. And we got talking through talking to her even, and under remembering conversations with my grandmother when I was a kid. I'm convinced that she left home under duress, like that things were not safe for her at home. And what did my grandmother do? The only option was, especially at that time, was to enter the army. I had this beautiful picture of her at the age of like 17 in her army outfit. Beautiful picture. And at that age, she entered the army and was serving at during this wartime. And you can only imagine, if any of you know history of London at that time and what was going on, it was horrific. And and especially going into the army of such rigidness and strictness, and that carried with my grandmother for the rest of her life. And at the age of 22, around 22, I was going through this therapy. My whole family was involved in therapy at that time. And remember, we went home for Christmas to see my grandmother, and she, with my mother and my stepdad. And I remember it was as if the lenses came off my eyes, especially. And we started seeing my grandmother as a very different person, someone who was very angry. And it was it was kind of rattling because we've been doing all this work. And so, and especially for me, because I've always seen my grandmother as this very loving, uptight, a little uptight, but she was always my grandmother. She always made me special things, kind of protected me from my own mother because that's another conversation. And the but my mother proceeded to write my grandmother a letter saying, I kind of had this experience. I want to heal this experience and I want us to grow in our relationship. Basically, my grandmother was so offended that she stopped all communication with my mother after that. And about a year later, my grandmother got cancer, renal cancer. And then a year after that, she died. And she died still angry and still not talking to my mother. She would not allow my mother to come and be with her during those final days. That's the power of devesha. That it really can distort our idea or perception, of who we think we are, and for right or wrong, you know, um, uh, for right or wrong. So that's the power of devesha. And again, one of the only ways to overcome it is experimentation. Being able to experiment with ourselves, challenge ourselves, put ourselves in different situations so that we can see how we react to certain things. Give up your TV for 30 days. Give up, wine for 30 days or 100 days or whatever. Or do something different. Get up early. Reach out to somebody that you haven't spoken to in a while and were really angry with before. Heal those things in your life so you can start to eradicate the devesha that's carrying you around and start to understand this great pull of force called raga. The last klesha here is a force called abhinavesha. And Abhinavesha is spelt Abhinivesah. Abhinavesha. No, just Abhinavesha. Abhinavesha. And so Abhinavesha in its truest sense means fear of death or just fear. And this fear is what propels us, in making many decisions. I always kind of say that 99% of our decisions are based upon fear that's not even real. You think about the acronym FEAR, false evidence appearing real. That so many of us are afraid of things. And that we make so many decisions in our life that feed into that fear. But coming from this sort of teaching, the fear feeds into this idea of who we think we are. I have this image of who I am, therefore I should be afraid of these things. Why should I be afraid of these things? Because this is who I am. This is what I've been told. This is what I've been taught. This is what society has told me to think. Since the beginning of time, death has been shrouded in mystery to all but the yogis. Yogis see death and birth in the same light. With death, life passes from manifest to unmanifest. From birth to unmanifest becomes manifest. Death has no power to destroy the essence of life. It remains the same in both birth and death. Death simply frees us from the old garment, our torn and tattered body, and our relationship with the world dependent on our physical existence. While we're alive, most of our actions are directed towards ensuring long life. We wish to live forever. The samskaras of those actions and wishes are stored in our minds. And yet we die each time we are born. Death shatters our wish to live forever. We die against our will. The samskara of shattered hope is also stored in our mind as we are taking our last breath. The life force presents our fading consciousness with a summary of our life, one that is virtually identical for most of us. Life has been a pointless saga, and so we breathe our last with a feeling of deep regret. Fear of death and clinging to life are inextricably intertwined. They are at work when we are growing as a fetus. Our brain develops in response to the demands of our primordial instinct. Fear of death and clinging to life establish themselves in the area that house our limbic system and hippocampus, the region known as the primitive brain. Urges such as hunger, sleep, and procreation are an offshoot of the urge for self-preservation. These, by the way, are all the attributes of first chakra. First chakra, the root chakra. These are all the attributes of the first chakra. And this is where some of the most important work of the yogi takes place, is to experiment with these urges, is to deeply experiment with these urges. Until we start to experiment with like how much sleep we think we need or how much food we think we need. We're constantly being pulled by these urges. And if we don't have them, we get afraid. Like, what did you just say a moment ago? When I go home, I'm going to arrive at 12. How am I going to get enough sleep? Right away. That's where your mind is at. It's not a bad thing, by the way. It's just go, oh, that's interesting. Like right away, there's this deep attachment to sleep that we're thinking now, by the way. I don't know exactly when you're going home, but I'm imagining it's 10 days from now, that your mind now is 10 days in the future, fearful that you're not going to get enough rest. That's how powerful these urges are. I was talking to a group leader, and she's like, these people eat a lot. I'm really afraid you're not going to have enough food. I mean, and it's a justified thing. I don't want to say that it's not. I mean, she's bringing people here. She wants to ensure the safety of her people. But there's this deep preoccupation with food. I've led so many retreats and so many trips and so many emails I've gotten. Am I going to get enough food? Did you want to say something? So the question is, do I need to be open to the unpleasantness of having enough sleep? This is such a loaded conversation. I give a whole talk on food, sex, sleep, and rock and roll. And um, this is like a whole hour conversation. But what I'll say right now is that it's really important for us to experiment with these things, to be okay with, the idea of having only 2 hours sleep. You know, the idea of maybe skipping a meal is okay. That, or maybe not eating that much is okay. Like right at this moment, this is the food I have. I'm going to be content with it. This is the amount of sleep I've had. I'm going to be content with it. There's been studies done to show that people, no matter how much sleep they get, if they make the decision, I just had enough sleep, then they've had enough sleep. So much of it is rooted in our belief system about these things that it's not really based on personal experience or scientific evidence. It's based upon our own sort of relationship to these things. So, the best advice I can give, which is the advice of the tradition, is to conduct experiments with it. Go without breakfast sometimes, go without dinner. Like, one of the best things that you can do for yourself sometimes, really, actually, it's a great thing to do, is go without dinner sometimes. See how you feel the next morning. Yeah, it's going to be hard because that urge to eat is so deep rooted. And no matter how many times I've fasted, if I haven't done it in a while and I do it again, it's really hard. I have to lock myself in my room all day. I cannot go out and see food right now. Or yeah. Yeah, I've actually had so many guests here say that every time they hear the bell, it triggers hunger inside of them. But so much of this Tian is rooted in our belief system. And but in relationship to these four fountains, food, sex, sleep, survival, it's the fear of not having it. The fear of, and we see this like back in March when things were getting real. What happened? All the toilet paper disappeared. God knows why. I don't get that one. Um, have you heard of a shower or a bidet? But you make your own bidet. Um, but that is like fear 101. There's this irrationality, and fear is irrational. I mean, if we really break down a lot of fears, we can overcome them. We had some people coming from Canada in the teacher training in October, and they were so cute. They, they knew that there was a risk of them getting COVID coming here, so they took their precautions. They wore a mask and they wore a face shield. They overcame their fear and they took the necessary precautions and wore some plastic gloves at some times, wore the face shield. So they overcame their fears. How did they do that? They became rational people. They broke down a fear and said, how can I be more safe? How can I do this more safely? If this is what I want to do, the other option was just to say, okay, I'm afraid, and stay at home and not do anything. So we have the potential to break down our fears, but we need to stop, breathe, and just sit with something for a moment and go, okay, is this a real fear? Like, am I going to die? Okay, or if I am going to die, then how can I prevent that? Like, that's kind of like that higher part of ourselves that can rationalize something and discriminate rather than just going with the flow of not. And it's an individual thing. It's not something that I can't go to you and say, you shouldn't be afraid of this, just move through it. This is work that you need to do on yourself to decide what you're comfortable with. There's other people that for them getting on the plane, even if they took those precautions, is too much of a greater risk because they've decided or they have medical, things that can be compromised. So it's a personal thing. It's not something that is necessarily universal, but we do need to do this work because, or we go crazy and we start believing that there's a group of people out there out to get us, and we see that evidence in the world. Like there's these fictitious bad people in the world that are out to do things to us. And this is this is the spiral of our mind if we don't start to address fear head on and start to discriminate knowledge in within ourselves. This is the work that you guys need to do once you leave here. Well, now, but continue on. Please continue on. The world needs you. The world needs your mind to be sharp, to be clear-headed, please. Really. Um and so just one second. Let me come back to it. So, this fear of death is an overwhelming experience. And one of my favorite things to do, and I haven't done it lately, but I did do it before, was do a day of fasting teacher training. And one of the reasons why I would say this and do this practice with people, it's because because I want you to have the knowledge you're not going to die if you go without food. People are literally say this perpetually. If I don't eat, I'm going to die. No, they really say this. No, everybody in this room could go without food for the next 30 days and we would be actually really healthy probably. Really. There's this insane like ideas out there that are perpetuated. I would love to do more things in teacher trainings to help people see these. But the problem is that not everybody wants to see these things. And so when people don't want to see things about themselves, Mr. Hyde comes out. And Dr. Yeah, Mr. Hyde comes out and rears their ugly head. And for me personally, I've come to the realization that for me to be a real teacher to some people, it's to be a real teacher to everybody. There's a place in our as teachers we need to um, just kind of point people in a direction and let them decide if they want to walk that path. But for me to create that space, even though that person knows that they're coming into that space, they're still going to rebel, and so I just choose to allow people to decide for themselves, rather than saying, here, we're going to do this and this, and then they get here knowing that they're going to do this and this, and then they turn into monsters after 5 days because they don't really want to be doing this, this, and this. An example of that is that person that came, we don't want to meditate anymore. so it's exhausting. And no, really, it's exhausting. I mean, it really is. You read the stories of these Himalayan masters, a lot of them didn't take students on because they just can't deal with people's egos. It's exhausting. It depletes our own energy to practice ourselves. It depletes us. So the path of least resistance is either A, don't take students, or B, if you do so in a way that is trying to be a space for everybody to gently be nudged along the path. And even then, we still get into issues because this has become an age of spiritual consumerism. Like, you're not the teacher that I think you should be, so therefore I'm going to write a bad Yelp review. You know, this is horrible, but it's the world that we live in. So, um, even doing the day of fasting, I've had serious arguments with Karina about it. And she said to me, I will never be in a teacher training with you again if you do a fasting. Like, I won't, if you do it, don't do it while I'm there because I won't support it. And there's this deep willfulness to not push ourselves a little bit beyond our who we think we are. We willfulness to stay in this, to hold on to this paradigm of whatever it is. It's hard to work with people when they don't want to be worked with. And keep this in mind, please, because you guys are going out and you want to become, some of you want to become teachers, that this hold on on our values and our belief system sometimes is very strong. And so we would rather die right than open up to a world or a universe of limitless possibility. We would rather die right than be open to the possibility of change and that life can look a little bit different. And it's hard to tell people, like, Lauren, you should not be angry. Have you ever had somebody say that to you when you're really upset about something? And they're like, stop being so angry. Just return to love and peace. And you just want to punch them in the face. I am angry. Stop telling me I shouldn't be angry. So when you're working with people, keep this in mind. Like, there's a place where there's a path of least resistance. And sometimes as teachers, if you want to be a teacher, like, that's kind of where you have to go. And sometimes it's better just remember, we're here to teach people how to move and teach people how to breathe safely. And sometimes just keep it simple. And then sneak in these teachings where you can and invite people to start creating experiments. Or, sometimes you see these 30-day challenges that people create. Maybe you can create a 30-day challenge where, this day we're going to practice relaxation. This day we're going to meet, at this time and do this practice. Or this day we're going to skip lunch. And, so you can do these things and kind of start to weave it in there. And the little by little, if people start to create small experiments, that is tapas. Experimentation is tapas. And that's when we start to see the potential for consciousness to wake up. The greater the influence of avidya, the duller and denser our inner faculties become. The flow of our inner intelligence is blocked. We see things only in fragments. Our self-trust, the cornerstone of our life, crumbles. Loss of self-trust causes us to lose trust in our loved ones, providence, truth, and justice. Our enthusiasm for life evaporates. We become weak and pitiful. Our survival issues intensify until we are totally consumed by the urge for self-preservation. So, this whole thing about fear is really important. And please conduct experiments on fear. Whenever you catch yourself saying, I'm afraid of something, or I'm not going to do something, ask yourself, am I not doing that, taking that step, taking that leap because I'm afraid? That's the trick. Start asking yourself, is there real, genuine fear here? And then if there is fear, start to take all the pieces of that fear apart, put them in a glass jars, put them in the pantry, and then start to look at them. Okay, this one, I don't need this one anymore. I don't need that one. I don't need one. Oh, that fear is actually real. Like, that's not a good idea. That's true. And the rest of it's not true. Okay, so if this one is true, what can I do to, be more safe? Yeah, I'm a scuba instructor. And so in scuba diving, you're putting yourself obviously in an environment that's not conducive for humans. I mean, we can agree on that because by mere fact that we don't breathe underwater. And so but when we're teaching diving to people, one of the very first rules that we always teach is whenever something happens to you underwater that you're not sure about, it could be like a fishing line attaches to you and you can't move, or you get tangled in some kelp or something like that, or something is wrong with your equipment. The very first instruction is stop. Stop. What do you think the next instruction is? Breathe. Take some deep, long breaths. The next instruction is to think. And then the fourth instruction is then act. But what we do in our lives is we get afraid of something and then we start breathing rapidly and we just start acting, which then usually perpetuates the fear, and then we start breathing more rapidly, and so that's in scuba diving, and I've seen it with students. Whenever we're teaching, we're always, like, as an instructor teaching somebody, we're always taught to hold the student when we do drills with them and have our hand ready over their regulator. Why do we do that? Because you cannot believe how many people underwater will panic and take their regulator out of their mouth. So I want to wrap up this conversation and bring it kind of back home to the sutras, that in further along the sutras, so remember this is like Sutra 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, that in later sutras, 246, we see, okay, the instruction for how to meditate, find a still and easy seat. In Sutra 248, that all the pairs of opposites cease to have any effect. Like, these kleshas stop having an effect on us. Isn't that a great promise? Like, we just for a moment, and you guys yesterday, I was watching you guys. There was a few moments yesterday in the practice that there was nothing in your space. Like, there was just nothing there. Like, you guys were completely clear. There was your sense of who you thought you were or are, your fears, your likes and dislikes. It was all gone. And for that moment, there was just consciousness. There's just consciousness. When you arrive in that space in yoga, try to just allow yourself to be saturated in that space. Patanjali in Sutra 247, he gives us the practice. And so this is Sutra 247. He tells us how to practice asana. He takes it even further. He says, practice asana by meditation, by the loosening of effort and meditation on the infinite. By the loosening of effort and the meditation on the infinite. I mean, probably, just as ancient people said, what the buggery bollocks does that mean? You're like you guys. That this um, Vyasa gave this really beautiful contemplation. It's kind of a contemplation slash affirmation. Sometimes you can say mantra, but it's in its truest sense, it's a bhavana. A bhavana is a feeling that you're engendering, a feeling that you're cultivating. That's really what bhavana means. Like, let's create some bhav here. Sometimes you'll hear teachers say that, yoga teachers, like, let's create a bhav. Let's create some love and devotion and community here. Like, let's feel the bhav. And or bhav also means love. And this bhavana that Vyasa gave was a statement that we're going to be using this morning in the practice. And the statement is, my mind is empty. My mind is empty. My body is like the vast expanse of sky. My body is like the vast expanse of sky. My mind is empty. My body is like the vast expanse of sky. And earlier we're talking about sthira and sukha. These two statements embody sthira and sukha quite beautifully, and really help us to begin to embody what this teaching is, so that ultimately these pairs of opposites, this distortion of mind, stops having an effect on us. This distortion that's clouding our mind starts to lift, and the brilliance of our mind can start to usher forth. Okay?